My father told me there was no room for failure in his house. That was 9 years ago. My mother stood right next to him and said nothing. So for 9 years, I paid their mortgage in secret because some part of me still wanted to be let back in. Then, at my grandmother's funeral, he did it again, and this time I stopped paying. My name is Marin Whitlock. I'm 34 years old, and I grew up in a brick colonial on Ash Hollow Road in Dayton, Ohio. The house my father built his entire identity around. He ran Whitlock Heating and Air for 26 years, a small HVAC company with 4 trucks, and his name on all of them. My mother kept the books, kept the house, kept the peace, in that order. I was the oldest of 2, and from the time I was maybe 14, I understood one thing clearly about that house. Love in it was conditional, and the condition was performance, grades, trophies, a clean, uneventful record. My younger brother Dean got a pass on almost everything. Missed curfews, a DUI at 19 that my father quietly paid to make disappear. 2 years of community college he never finished. None of it cost him anything at home. I got graded on everything, including things that weren't actually mine to control, like a B- in AP Chemistry my junior year that earned me a 20-minute lecture about wasted potential. I remember being 16 and bringing home a report card with 5 A's and 1 B+, and my father circling the B+ in red pen and leaving it on the kitchen counter for 2 days, so I'd see it every time I walked past. That same semester, Dean brought home 2 D's and a suspension for skipping class to go to a concert in Cincinnati, and my father's response was to buy him a car for his 16th birthday anyway, because, as he put it, the boy needs something to be excited about. I paid for my own car at 19, a used Honda with 90,000 miles on it, working weekends at a garden center for $8.25 an hour. Nobody circled anything in red pen for that. Nobody mentioned it at all. By 22, I had a marketing degree, a job at a regional ad agency in Columbus, and an apartment 40 minutes from my parents' house. I called my mother every Sunday at 6. I sent my father articles about HVAC efficiency regulations and tax credits, because some small, stubborn part of me still thought I could earn his approval through sheer usefulness. It didn't really work, but it didn't need to. Not yet. I was building something, and I believed, the way you do at 22, that building something eventually gets you let in the door. Then, at 25, the agency did a round of layoffs. I was one of 14 people let go in a single Thursday afternoon meeting that lasted 4 minutes and ended with a box and a security escort. I had $1,100 in savings, 6 weeks left on my lease, and a car payment due in 9 days. I did what I thought any daughter could reasonably do. I asked to stay with my parents for 2 months, just long enough to land something new. My mother said yes on the phone, almost immediately, almost warmly. My father didn't say anything at all until I was already standing in the front doorway with 2 suitcases and a box of kitchen things. He looked at the suitcases. Then he looked at me. Then he said, "We didn't raise you to fall apart the first time something got hard." I told him it was a layoff, not a character flaw. 14 people. Not just me. He said, "In this house, there's no room for failure. Not there's no room right now. Not let's talk about a plan. Just that, flat and final, like a policy he'd been holding in reserve for exactly this moment." My mother was standing 3 feet behind him in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and she said nothing. Not Gerald. That's enough. Not let her stay a few weeks. Nothing at all. I picked my suitcases back up, got in my car, and drove to a Motel 6 off Route 4, where I sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes and cried before I even turned the engine off. I found a new job in 7 weeks, a better one, actually, at a firm that would eventually make me a director. I never asked either of them for anything again. Not money, not a place to stay, not even advice. Here's the part that doesn't make sense to most people, including, for a long time, me. 4 years after that night in the doorway, I found out through my brother Dean, almost by accident, on a call about something else entirely, that my parents' HVAC business had taken a hard hit during a slow stretch after a big commercial contract fell through, and they were 3 months behind on the mortgage. My father's pride wouldn't let him tell anyone that directly. My mother wasn't working outside the house at all by then. Dean mentioned the money trouble, The way you'd mention traffic, a minor inconvenience. Not a crisis, because to him it was just background noise. To me it was information I couldn't unhear. I didn't call them. I didn't offer anything out loud, partly out of pride myself, I'll admit, and partly because I already knew what a direct offer would cost me in dignity. Instead, I did something quieter. I set up a shell LLC, Silver Maple Holdings, registered it to a P.O. box 2 towns over, with a registered agent service so my name wouldn't show up on any public filing. Through a private note purchase broker, I bought the delinquent mortgage note itself before the bank could formally begin foreclosure, which cost me a little over $11,000, just to bring the account current and take over as the note holder. I set up a separate business checking account for the LLC, funded it from my own savings and a small draw against my 401k, and automated the monthly transfer so it would never once be late, because if I was going to do this, I wasn't going to be the reason the house actually went under. From that point on, Silver Maple Holdings quietly paid $1,840 a month, on time, every month, directly to keep the house out of default, and neither of my parents ever knew that name was anywhere near me. I told myself it wasn't about them. It was about the house itself, the oak tree in the backyard I learned to climb on at 6, my mother's garden beds along the back fence. Some stubborn, aching part of me that still wanted, someday, for that house to feel like it had room for me in it again. For 5 years, I paid it like a second rent, telling no one except my accountant, who thought I was quietly insane, and said so more than once, and I never once got so much as a birthday card that felt like it meant anything in return. I told myself that was fine. I told myself love doesn't need to be reciprocal, to still count as real. I was wrong about that. It just took my grandmother's funeral to show me exactly how wrong. My grandmother, Eleanor, died in March at 89, the one person in that entire family who ever actually asked me how I was doing and then waited, quietly, for the real answer. At the funeral reception, in the church basement, surrounded by folding chairs and 3 different casserole dishes, my father cornered me by the coffee urn. He'd had 2 glasses of wine, which was 1 more than his usual 0. "Your grandmother always worried about you," he said you never really landed anywhere solid. I told him I was a director now, overseeing a team of 9, that I owned my condo outright, that I'd built an entire life without a single dollar from him, and that I'd actually just closed our biggest client contract that quarter, a detail I mentioned mostly because some old tired part of me still hoped it would land as something worth noticing. He said, "Sure. Marketing, real stable industry that." Then, in front of my aunt, my cousin, and 2 of Dean's friends, he said the thing that finally broke something loose in me. Some people just aren't built for pressure. Never have been. Never will be. I looked past him at my mother, who was standing 3 feet away again, exactly like 9 years earlier, holding a paper plate of ham and dinner rolls, and I waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5. She looked down at her plate and asked my aunt whether the potato salad was store-bought. That was it. That was the entire response. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. "Not there," I said, "excuse me," and I drove home in silence for 2 hours, replaying 9 years of quiet mortgage statements, and 1 dish towel and 1 paper plate, both times. Both silences. The next morning, I called my accountant and told her to stop the Silver Maple Holdings payment, effective immediately. No explanation given to anyone, no warning to anyone, not even to her really. Beyond "I'm done." The first missed payment didn't get noticed by my parents for 6 weeks, because the bank's late notices go to a mailbox my father barely checks, stuffed mostly with catalogs and HVAC supplier flyers. By the second missed payment, the bank called the house directly, and Dean told me later that my father screamed at a customer service representative for 11 straight minutes before slamming the phone down and telling my mother it was a bank error, obviously. By month 3. They were in official default, and a notice of intent to foreclose went out by certified mail, the kind that requires a signature, the kind you can't pretend you didn't receive. My father, for the first time in 5 years, actually sat down and read the full mortgage statement, and he noticed something that had been true the entire time, and that he had simply never once checked. The payments for the last 5 years hadn't come from his own account. They'd come from an LLC he had never heard of, on a schedule he had never set up, for an amount that matched his mortgage almost exactly. He assumed first that it was fraud, someone running some kind of scheme on the house. He hired a lawyer, not to fight the foreclosure itself, but specifically to find out who Silver Maple Holdings was. It took the lawyer 11 days and roughly $600 in fees to trace the LLC back through its registered agent, and from there back to me. My father called me on a Wednesday night. I let it go straight to voicemail. The message ran 47 seconds. Marin, call me back. Whatever you think you're doing with this, it stops now. This is still your mother's house. I didn't call back that night. He called again the next day, and the day after that, each time a little angrier, each time with a slightly different argument, like he was testing which one would land. First it was outrage. You had no right to interfere in our finances. Then it shifted to guilt. Your mother hasn't slept in 3 nights over this. Then, finally, on the 4th call, it became an offer, almost gentle. If this is about money, we can figure something out. Family helps family. I finally called him back myself on a Sunday afternoon, sitting in my own kitchen, in my own condo that I paid for myself, and I said one sentence. There's no room for failure in your house. I decided to stop paying for a house that never had room for me in it either. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That's not fair. We didn't fail you. We held a standard." I said, "You held a standard for me. You held a safety net for Dean. I'm done quietly funding either one." He tried a second angle, sharper this time. "You realize you're punishing your mother for something that was between you and me." I said, "My mother had 5 separate chances to say one sentence in my defense. She chose potato salad instead, twice." He didn't have an answer for that one. I hung up first. I'd like to say that call ended things quietly. It didn't. 2 weeks later, my father tried a different move entirely. He went to his bank to apply for an emergency home equity line, using equity that on paper barely existed anymore. Once the missed payments and late fees were factored in, the loan officer, a woman named Patricia, who I never met, but heard about secondhand from Dean, told him plainly that the property was already in an active default status, and that no responsible lender would extend new credit against it. He left, according to Dean, not in a good mood. That same week, he called my workplace directly, got the general reception line, and asked to speak to my supervisor. Not me, my supervisor, apparently intending to explain that his daughter was sabotaging her own family in her spare time. The receptionist, confused, transferred him to HR instead, who politely informed him that personal family matters weren't something the company handled, and asked him not to call again. He did not call again, but he did email me a long message that night, copying Dean and, strangely, my aunt, laying out a timeline of everything he'd sacrificed for a business that put a roof over my head for 18 years. I read it twice. I didn't respond. Then he tried the softest angle of all, sending my mother to make the case instead, because he'd apparently learned, at least partially, that his own voice wasn't landing. My mother called on a Tuesday evening. She didn't open with an apology. She opened with, "Your father says you're trying to take the house." I told her that wasn't true. I told her I was simply no longer willing to secretly fund a house that had told me, out loud, there was no room in it for me. She said, "That was 9 years ago, Marin. People move on." I asked her if she remembered what she'd actually done that night, standing in the doorway with a dish towel in her hands. She said she remembered it differently. I asked her how exactly there could be a different version of a woman standing 3 feet away and saying nothing. She didn't answer that part. Instead, she said, "I've always loved you the same as Dean." I told her love that never shows up out loud isn't something a person can actually spend or lean on or use. It's just a private feeling that benefits the person having it. I said, I did move on. I moved 3 states of distance and 9 years of silence, and 1 funeral where you looked at your plate instead of me. She didn't have an answer for that either, and the call ended a few minutes later, with both of us saying almost nothing at all. My Aunt Denise, my father's older sister, tried her own approach a week after that, inviting me to lunch under the pretense of just catching up, only for me to arrive and find my father already seated at the table, clearly staged, clearly planned without telling me. I sat down anyway, out of curiosity more than anything. Denise opened with, "We just want to understand your thinking." My father said nothing for the first 10 minutes, letting her do the softening work, which was its own kind of tactic. I recognized later. When I explained calmly the doorway, the funeral, the plate of ham, Denise turned to my father and asked, "Gerald, is that true?" "Did you say that to her twice?" he said. I said what needed to be said. He didn't deny it. He just didn't think it required an apology. I finished my coffee, thanked Denise for lunch, and left before the food even arrived, which felt at the time like the calmest thing I'd ever done in that family. Right before all of that, my father tried one more thing, the sharpest thing he had left. He had his lawyer send me a cease and desist letter claiming that Silver Maple Holdings' original purchase of the note 5 years earlier constituted undue interference in a family financial matter and threatening a lawsuit if I didn't reinstate the payments. I forwarded it to my own attorney, a woman named Priya, who specializes in real estate and contract law, and she read it in about 4 minutes before telling me flatly that it had no legal basis whatsoever. A note holder is legally entitled to enforce or decline to enforce the terms of a note they lawfully purchased, full stop, family relationship or not. Priya drafted a 2-paragraph response that ended with a line I still think about. My client's prior voluntary assistance created no ongoing obligation, express or implied, to continue that assistance indefinitely. My father's lawyer never replied to it. 3 weeks later, in what I can only describe as a last, desperate swing, my father actually showed up at my condo unannounced, on a Saturday morning, standing in my hallway in his work jacket, asking to just talk one-on-one. No lawyers. I let him in for 11 minutes. He sat at my kitchen table, the one I bought with my own director's salary, and he said, "You've made your point. Whatever it is, just fix it." I asked him what point he thought I was making. He said that you can hurt us if you want to. I told him that was never the point. The point was that I had spent 5 years trying to earn my way back into a house that had a permanent sign on the door that only I could see, and I was finally done applying for a spot that was never actually available. He didn't have anything to say to that. He left 11 minutes after he arrived, almost to the second, and didn't come back. The foreclosure process moved forward after that, largely because my father, out of pure pride, refused every loan modification option the bank offered, convinced this was still fixable through one more angry phone call or one more sharply worded letter. It wasn't. The house went to a sheriff's sale auction on a Thursday morning in late September, held on the courthouse steps in downtown Dayton, the same courthouse where my parents had gotten married 38 years earlier, a detail I only learned afterward from my aunt. I was there, not through an LLC this time, not through a broker, not through a registered agent, not hidden at all. In my own name, Marin Elizabeth Whitlock, standing in a navy blazer, holding a cashier's check for $214,000 and a bidder number pinned to my jacket. I'd shown up an hour early, sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot, and read through the property disclosure packet one more time, even though I'd already read it 4 times the night before. There were 4 other bidders that morning, 2 of them clearly investors, flipping properties for a living, checking phones between rounds, talking to each other in the shorthand of people who did this every week, and felt nothing about any of it. I felt everything about it, and I didn't let it show on my face once. I outbid all of them by $9,000 on the second round, and the auctioneer's gavel came down at 11:42 in the morning, closing on a number nobody else in that crowd had any reason to fight for as hard as I did. My father was standing across the courthouse lawn that morning because Dean had told him the sale date, thinking, I assume, that watching would give him some kind of closure, or maybe some last chance at leverage. Instead, he watched his own daughter buy his house out from under him in 9 minutes, in broad daylight, in front of 2 of his old business contacts who happened to be walking by and clearly recognized exactly whose family this was. He didn't approach me afterward. He just stood there on the courthouse lawn, hands in his jacket pockets, for what one of his old contacts later told Dean was a long time longer than made sense. My mother wasn't there at all. She told me later she couldn't make herself watch, which I understood, even if I didn't have much sympathy left to spend on it. 2 days later, the county recorder's office processed the deed transfer, and the house on Ash Hollow Road officially carried my name, and only my name. For the first time in its 31-year history in that family, my parents had 90 days to vacate, under the standard terms of a sheriff's sale. My mother called me 11 times during that window. I let the first 3 go. I picked up on the 4th call. She cried for the first 2 minutes before she said anything I could actually respond to. Then she said, "I should have said something at the funeral. I should have said something 9 years ago in that doorway." I said, "You should have." "You didn't." "Twice, in the exact same way, 9 years apart." She asked, carefully, almost bracing for the answer, if there was any way I'd let them stay, maybe pay me rent going forward, work something out as a family. I told her I'd think about it, which I noticed, even as I said it, was the exact sentence my father had used on me 9 years earlier, right before he changed nothing at all. I did actually think about it, though, for 6 full days. Then I offered her, specifically her, not both of them, a 2-year lease at fair market rent, with her name only on the agreement, not my father's name anywhere on it. She could stay in the house she'd lived in for 3 decades. He couldn't. She didn't take the offer. She said she wasn't willing to leave him, not even for the one home she'd ever really known as hers, and I understood that on some level, even though it cost her the house entirely, and even though some small part of me had quietly hoped she'd choose differently. They moved into a rental townhouse across town in December. Dean helped them move the furniture. I didn't. I wasn't invited to help, and for the first time in my adult life, that omission didn't feel like rejection. It felt oddly like a boundary finally holding on its own. I own the house on Ash Hollow Road outright now. No mortgage, no LLC, no hidden name behind a registered agent. I spent 4 months renovating the kitchen, turned my old childhood bedroom into a proper office, and planted 2 new trees in the backyard, where the old oak used to be, because it hadn't survived the last windstorm, which felt honestly about right, given everything else that didn't survive that year either. I don't rent the house out. I don't sell it. I live in it, on my own terms, with my name on the deed, and no one else's permission required for anything in it. Dean of everyone actually apologized on his own, without me asking, for how easy his own path had been, while mine kept getting audited. We talk most weeks now, which is more than I can say for the other 2. My father still calls Dean every few months to ask if I've come around yet. I haven't. My mother sends a card at Christmas now, signed only with her name. I send one back, signed only with mine. That's the entire relationship at this point, and for the first time, I'm not quietly waiting for it to become more than that. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty about how it all ended, about the house, the auction, the silence since. I tell them the truth. I spent 9 years secretly buying my way back into a house that told me, out loud, in its own doorway, there was no room for me in it. I confused paying for a place with actually being wanted in one. Those are not the same thing, and it took me far too long and far too much money to finally learn the difference. Now the house has room for exactly one person who was never allowed to fail in it, me.